All right, good morning. Welcome to the 5 cybersecurity priorities to address before 2021. This is small business edition, although I think some billion-dollar organizations could learn from it too. And you're here with Mike Ritzma. I'm Mike Ritzma, president of i3 Business Solutions, and Brian Abraham, our CIO, CTO, and security specialists. Let's get straight.
Everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Let's get straight into it, and that is information security. And we're talking about cyber criminals, the hackers. And we have this image of, these nefarious people or some geek sitting there by himself. But in fact, in the lower right-hand corner here, what we're talking about in some cases is hundreds of people in an office in somewhere in the world pursuing your money. Spear phishing, whale phishing, social engineering to get your money. And we've got a 1-hour webinar. You're welcome to request from Brian or me or your account tech, your technical account manager. But this guy right here, Brett Johnson, who was on the FBI top 10 most wanted list. And right the day after he saw it, the day after he took $170,000 out of ATMs. And we're talking about, he tells stories about cyber criminals that are making $70,000 a week. And like I said, war room offices of people social engineering us. And 1 million people around the world working using the dark web, which has services available to build the attack. And different types of people coming together. Brian and I were just talking, kind of like your own business. You need different skills, and they come together on the dark web, and they go to work, and they accomplish these tasks. How do they do it? 81% of these hacks are through email and social engineering. But certainly we know the real breaches that have occurred. Brian and I can name a half a dozen companies over the last 1 to 5 years who have transferred between $25,000 and $100,000 to the bad guys. Spear phishing, whale phishing, transferring this money. These organizations are not calling M Live and saying, guess what I just did? They're not going to their local business group and saying, hey, guess what just happened to me? No, these things don't go public. We're very quiet about these mistakes that we make. Steelcase.
So, in the example of Steelcase, Mike, that's a West Michigan company that anybody around here is familiar with that breach. But the only reason something like that makes the news is, one, they're a publicly traded company and it's SEC reportable. And number two, you have employees that kind of leak it to the news. But the company they're not interested in advertising what happened.
Good point. They're public. And we know people at Steelcase. Many of us have friends that work there or work there, and when production is shut down for 2 weeks, word gets out pretty fast.
Oh yeah.
And then certainly the SolarWinds, the recent event we're reading about every day in the world, in the news, federal government departments, was a software supply chain attack, right, Brian?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting one. That one did not come through by someone clicking on an email. That's not how it got into all the 18,000 companies that they're saying are breached. But it was downloaded through legitimate software, the SolarWinds software that these companies were using. The bad guys infiltrated the supply chain and infected that supply chain product. So when you downloaded an update to your software, just like you're doing what you're supposed to do, you brought down the malware inside the SolarWinds software. And yeah, very interesting one, very targeted, and that one's going to be making the news for a long time to come. Very big deal.
You bet. So let's get into it. What are the 5 recommendations? They are: number 1, back up your stuff. Number 2, patch and antivirus. Seriously, blocking and tackling. We'll get into these in detail. Checklist, security, execution. Who is watching this stuff and making sure and reviewing that it's actually happening? And then multi-factor authentication and account access review. And we'll get into these in detail again. Let's start right now with back up your stuff. And Brian, go ahead.
Yep. So, I mean, classic backups, right? The thing that's changed in the ransomware world is you got to make sure those backups are offline and offsite. So what we've found, what everybody will tell you is that, you know, when the bad guys get in, the number one thing they go after is their backups, because you having good backups is preventing them from getting paid. So you want to make sure those are encrypted, they're sent off-site, they are offline, they're inaccessible. So if your network is breached in any way, those backups cannot be destroyed. You're safe and recoverable, and it puts you in the best position to get back up and running. And you know, it's an interesting thing that hasn't been talked about too much, but the US government is saying in a pretty official way, do not pay the bad guys because you're funding cyber terrorism when you do.
Yep. So two more things there. You can see that it's hard to read, but most SMBs, many SMBs, back up their stuff to direct attached storage or an external hard drive. And that, as Brian's saying, is not air gapped. It can be encrypted, and that is a problem. So secondly is just know that if you're running Office 365, you can take your document files, your photos, your music on your PC, and you can sync it to OneDrive. I recently changed PCs. I've got all my personal documents and stuff on my laptop backed up to Office 365. I've got a Quicken file that is goes back 20 years. That baby synced perfectly. When I really loaded the new laptop, opened that thing up, perfect. So again, get with your i3 tech if you're interested in help with that. Back up your stuff. Number one, layer of security, the failsafe. Number two, patching and antivirus. Seriously, what say you, Brian?
Yep. So you mentioned at the beginning, Mike, that the number one way people are getting in is users are letting them in through clicking on a phishing link, right? Something like that plants a little seed on their computer that allows someone to take the next step. And that's how most of these breaches occur, is they start with baby steps that go from one vulnerability to another vulnerability to another. And a lot of those, once they get a tiny foothold on the network, like on a user's PC, if things inside the network are unpatched, if there's old operating systems, Windows 7, in manufacturing environments, Mike, we still see a lot of Windows XP because those old systems, you know, it's a lot of work to get them moved to the next level, and those companies are not taking the right precautions to secure those systems. Well, when you have those out there, those systems that haven't been patched in forever, there's a lot of commonly available tools that you can use to hack into those and steal credentials. So you can see who's logging into it, you can steal their passwords, then you now have access to the rest of the network. So those unpatched systems allow those baby steps for the bad guys to get an increased foothold. It's
so ironic that, you know, number one priority, layer of security, is back up your stuff. Number two, patching and antivirus, we almost forget about it. We've been doing it for a decade. But Brett Johnson says 90% of all attacks use known exploits, not zero-day. Why? Because there's millions of PCs and servers all over the world that are not properly patched. So let's just look for those and get to work. It's the low-hanging fruit. It's the easy stuff. The zero-day exploit is the one you read about in your news feed on your phone. It's like, holy cow, Microsoft browser has a major hole in it. The whole world's at risk. And no, they're not jumping on that and saying, oh boy, here we go. They're using the stuff that's been known for years, and software has been built to exploit it. And they're going out and finding the low-hanging fruit.
Yep.
So number three, checklist security execution. And these are some fundamentals, but certainly a layer of security, your firewall. We see so many firewalls that have been out there for 4 to 8 years and haven't been patched in 4 to 8 years. But let's make sure that firewall is patched and up to date. And then cybersecurity education. Again, the human firewall, the biggest hole in your company, the biggest security hole is the human error, the human firewall. Therefore, cybersecurity and education. Anything else you want to touch on relative to checklist security execution, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, a common thing when we do assessments, Mike, is on the firewall, we find things are wide open to the world that just should never be. And maybe they were set up that way long ago by vendor. We still have vendors, some software vendor puts a piece of equipment in somebody's network and says, hey, we need you to open up the firewall and do X, Y, and Z. And our guys are like, what are you talking about? Like, that is not something that we can do. Like, that's opening this client up to a lot of risk. And then, there's some dialogue that occurs like, okay, well, we can put it behind VPN, or we can allow it only from your building. So there's a lot of rules in firewalls that are putting you at risk if you're not tightly managing those.
Yep. So again, get with your guy, get with your IT manager or company or individual and say, are we doing this stuff? So certainly multi-factor authentication, we're banging that drum. We're going to bang that drum forever. Brian, what say you? Then I have a couple comments.
Yep, so multi-factor is right along the lines of phishing. This multi-factor was never really needed before people started clicking on links and emails and putting in their passwords, right? You probably get a dozen documents through Office 365, or somebody shared something with you, or something else where you've got to click on something to access a document, or you got to put in a password. So it's without the cybersecurity education, when people do that, they're just giving their password away to the bad guys. And we have all of our clients enrolled in a service that will check for when those show up on the dark web. But it's certainly alarming how many of those passwords are out there. So even if a user gives out their password to the bad guys, with multi-factor authentication, they still got to have this little device in their hand in order to get logged in. So multi-factor is what is protecting you from a password breach from occurring. It's that extra layer of security. And what we're finding, Mike, is that if you are enrolled in, if you have cybersecurity insurance, if you're in a compliance industry, healthcare, they're requiring you to have multi-factor authentication turned on because it's deemed a minimum level of protection now.
Yes. So, I say, make sure it's on in your business. Now, we've been banging the drum for multi-factor for email because that's where the phishing's occurring. But at i3, we're way past that. And in my personal life, I'm way past that. So my personal email has multi-factor authentication. Every banking and credit card is multi-factor authentication for me. So in your business, certainly your email, whether it's Google or Office 365, but also your banking, your payroll, your accounting, your line of business software can be put on multi-factor authentication. So start going the next level to protect your organization as you move into 2021. Let's go beyond just email for multi-factor authentication. Then the last recommendation here, I'm going to hand it straight over to Brian for account access review.
Yep, so this is again kind of some basic cybersecurity hygiene. And most companies have Active Directory. Know who has access to your network. Know what those user accounts are. Do regular cleanup to remove old employees, to remove old vendor accounts. So if you're an i3 customer, you should be seeing that from us on a regular basis, where we're kind of exporting that list, providing it to you to review, make sure that we're both on the same page. These are active user accounts. One of the first things that we do, with a new client or when we do a security assessment is review that list. And I don't think I've ever done one, Mike, where I haven't found stuff that is years and years old. They're like, oh, that person hasn't been here in years, or we haven't used that vendor for years. But all those accounts are still active on the system. The passwords might be password 123. By the way, the SolarWinds breach, one of the ways they access the supply chain, the security researcher said that they notified them in 2019 that they could access the repository with the password SolarWinds 123. So knowing who has access to those systems and knowing if those passwords are secure is critical to securing your environment.
Yeah, then the other thing I've seen you point out in reviews, Brian, is admin users, and we've worked with prospective customers and customers with 5 to 8 admin users. Something else you tightened down, right?
Yep, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of IT administrators used to do that. I used to see it a lot back in the day. It was kind of a get out of jail free card. If something wasn't working and the application wasn't working for a user, they would make the user a domain admin and everything started working. It's a kind of a lazy, sloppy way of getting working through permissions issues. And if those are never addressed, or if that was kind of the standard operating procedure, you end up with a lot of regular users who are administrators on the domain. Now, when they click on, when their password gets breached or they click on that phishing link, now somebody has straight unfettered access into everything.
So we're tightening that down. So then I'd like you to speak to EDR, and for the last bullet here, industry-specific compliance and personal risk tolerance. Your industry may have specific requirements that therefore we recommend certain layers of security specific to your industry. And so your personal risk tolerance relative to your business is up to you. We are going to make the recommendations for layers of security, and you can choose how much risk you want to take. Now, EDR is interesting. We're going through now, and we are recommending endpoint detection and response. And that basically says that if anything changes on your PC or server, which is usually an executable that a cyber criminal puts on there in some way, then it is immediately flagged by our security operations center, and we're going to take a look at that. And Brian, you've mentioned that the first action in cyber criminals will actually send an email after somebody has been breached relative to EDR.
Oh yeah. So what has been reported now is if a company doesn't pay, if they're able to restore their systems, the bad guys are sending an email that says, "We know you're installing EDR software. We know that you're taking these measures and it's not going to help." And the reason they're saying that is because the number one thing companies do after they suffer a breach is they take it to the next level of security, which includes EDR software. And like Mike said, it's kind of the next generation of antivirus software, and it is more behavior analysis based. So a lot of the ransomware, a lot of the bad things that are happening, the bad guys figured out that using a commonly known virus gets caught by antivirus software. We're going to use the stuff that's built into Windows to execute our bad deeds. We're going to use PowerShell. We're going to use command line. We're going to send these surreptitious commands that do our bidding without any antivirus. So what EDR software does is it looks for that anomalous behavior. It looks for good things, good programs being used in malicious ways and flags that as a malicious activity.
Beautiful. So that's a wrap. Those are our 5 cybersecurity year-end recommendations, and that is fundamental blocking and tackling in back up your stuff and patching antivirus. And then checklist security execution. Let's make sure that the layers are in there and they're actually being reviewed and updated on a regular basis. Multi-factor authentication. Let's take it further than email. Let's start bringing it out to your business operations systems, your line of business systems, and then account access. Let's make sure we know who has access to our accounts and systems and what level of security they have. We do have an offer, and that is we will do a complimentary user account access audit and report for you. We will do a dark web scan for you and show you what we find out there. We'll show you what the cyber criminals have access to relative to your business, and then we will make best practice recommendations. One of the favorite reviews we did with Brian was a company in West Michigan that used 1Password for everything. The owner of the company said, I want to keep it simple. This is the password. We're going to use it for everything. We did our dark web scan, and when the COO was sitting in the office with us, he looked at the password and the last 4 digits or the 4 characters of the password and said, that's our password. So real valuable information on what's out there in the dark web. Let us know if you'd like some help reviewing your security at that level. So it's Mike Ritzema and Brian Abraham signing off. Reach out to us at our email address there, or give us a call, or reach out to your contact at i3 Business Solutions. Going into 2021, let's tighten up our companies.